Very good morning and welcome to this EPC briefing on Repowering Europe update from the Swedish Presidency. I'm Annika Hedberg, Head of Sustainable Prosperity for Europe program at the European Policy Center, and will be moderating today's discussion. We are absolutely delighted to have with us Daniel Liljeberg, State Secretary to the Swedish Minister for Energy, Business and Industry, Ebba Busch. And he will be telling us more about the priorities of the Swedish Presidency on energy, as well as the progress made this spring, including what was discussed and agreed in the Energy Council meeting on 19th of June. Just to say, since Russia started its war in Ukraine, the EU has seen a tsunami of initiatives and proposals to accelerate the clean energy transition. This is seen as a key to achieve a secure, sustainable and affordable European energy supply. And cutting our dependency on Russian fossil fuels is also central to ending our financial support for Russian war chest. Now, during this Commission's term, we've seen several proposals and measures to accelerate rollout of renewable energy sources. We've seen higher targets for the share of renewables in the EU's energy mix, efforts to streamline, simplify national permitting procedures, speed up of deployment of heat pumps, as well as suggestions to reform the internal electricity market. But we also know the work is only starting. There are still a number of hurdles to be overcome. And we're very happy to use today's briefing and the discussion to take stock of where we are. As always, we very much look forward to also the questions and comments from our audience. So if you're interested to pose a question, you can either click to indicate if you wish to speak, or alternatively, you can use the space provided to ask short written questions. With these words, Daniel, please, the floor is yours. And as said, we're just absolutely delighted to have you with us and take the time from your busy schedule to join us. Thank you.
No problem at all, and let me also, I'm also delighted to be with you today, this morning, and I want to thank you for the invitation to this webinar and the opportunity to talk about the Swedish Presidency, which is almost over, and we're glad to hand it over to the very competent Spanish Presidency in a short time. Throughout this presidency, we have focused on making real progress. All things considered, we think that we have also delivered on that. I think we should note that it's only 2 years since the Commission presented its Fit for 55 package to ensure that we are on track to achieve our common target of climate neutrality by 2050 at the latest. It was an ambitious plan, and now we can conclude that during this presidency and the former ones, we have come a long way towards finalizing many of the important legislative acts in the Fit for 55 and REPowerEU proposals, as well as the gas market package. Now, there's a very tragic reason for that, and that is the illegal and terrible Russian invasion of Ukraine. And I think that has probably speeded up things in the EU. So for a very tragic reason, but still we have been able to see that the EU can act and make decisions during the French, the Czech and the Swedish presidencies. I think even outside the conflict and the invasion that I just mentioned, energy is and will be in the center of EU policy for a long time. It's probably never been like this in previous times. Now it relates to climate change, security, foreign relations, and industrial competitiveness. So many fields go, energy goes into many fields, I think. So more than ever, it's important for the EU to act jointly, decisively, and responsibly. About the Swedish presidency at the halfway mark, we could conclude that in March we had real progress on several ongoing negotiations. At the council meeting on the 28th of March, we reached a general approach for the gas market package. We also reached a preliminary political agreement with the Parliament on 2 key directives in the Fit for 55 package, the directive on renewable energy and the directive on energy efficiency. As you all know now, thanks to this, the EU will now increase its 2030 targets to a binding target of 42.5% renewable energy while reducing energy consumption by 11.7%. These things will be game changers. For sure, it will also be a challenge to achieve for the member states, of course. However, I'm sure that these decisions will create conditions for the EU to have industrial competitiveness and new jobs in sectors that will deliver products and services, not only to member states in the EU, but also on a global level. REPowerEU introduced additional proposals for the directives of renewable energy, energy efficiency, and energy performance of buildings. These proposals have been brought into the ongoing council and trilogue negotiations, so there's progress there too. Furthermore, the energy transition is speeding up. The deal on the renewables directive, together with the revised gas market package, will make sure that the switch to hydrogen and biomethane and fossil-free electricity in industry and transport has a real impact on emissions. At the Energy Council meeting in March, the Council decided to extend the emergency regulation on gas savings throughout this storage season and until the next heating season. So that was also important. Under the second half of the presidency, we've worked intensively in the Council negotiations on the reform of the electricity market. And its design. And that has been a priority for us. And only in the last few days, we've had some really good progress. We've not finalized it, but we had progress. On Monday, we could agree on the Council general approach to the proposal for regulation on wholesale energy markets, integrity and transparency, the REMIT. We also had a discussion on Monday on the proposal for regulation to improve the Union's electricity market design. We're almost at the finish line there, but not completely. There are some remaining parts that need to be discussed and agreed on a later scale. Electrification of industrial production and transportation will significantly increase electricity demand during the coming decades, while we also phase out fossil fuels. This is going to be a great challenge, and there's no single silver bullet that alone will solve this for us. We're going to need nuclear, wind, electrofuels, bioenergy. They will all be important. I should also mention that buildings count for about 40% of the energy use in the EU and 36% of the greenhouse gases in the Union. So we need to make progress there as well. So we're glad to say that we've been able to start trilogue negotiations on the EPBD, and we look forward to continuing discussions there during the Spanish presidency, which Spain will take over in July. I can conclude that we have had progress on many legal acts that are necessary to deliver a completely fossil-free energy system by 2050. So that's good. And I think looking back on the past year, we should conclude that the EU has proven again that it can act swiftly, and it causes me to feel somewhat optimistic about the future, that the EU is able to take big decisions in troubled times. And I will stop there and please continue the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this introduction and providing us kind of an overview of where we are at the moment. And I'm sure that there will be a number of questions also from the audience on the state of play. But before I open up the Q&A for the rest of the audience, we've actually invited several of our members to provide introductory comments, questions. And I would like to first invite Nicola Reka from CEFIC, who has his hand up to join the discussion.
Yes, good morning. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, very good.
Yes, good. Okay, so first of all, thanks a lot, Daniel, for you and your team for the excellent job that you have done. I think it was not a given to close so many files, so congratulations for that. For us, it's from an industrial point of view, CEFIC is representing European chemical industry, and for us, of course, closing pending files means reducing the regulatory uncertainty that comes with it. 2030 is really behind the corner, so we need to absolutely finalize the European legislation and then go into the speedy implementation side. But of course, if you don't close the files at European level, it's difficult to move forward. I was also very pleased to hear so many references in your introduction speech to industrial competitiveness. I know that it's historically at the heart of the Swedish government, but it's always good to have it also repeated at European level. From our side, as we are exposed to international competition, it's important to connect the dots. And also it's important that we finalize also the work with other files, which are one way or the other interconnected with the renewable energies and the low carbon transition. So the Net Zero Industry Act is important, Critical Raw Material Act, and also to develop or finalize or clarify all the support mechanisms that will help the industry moving towards 2030 and beyond. And I really wish that you don't give up the last 9 days of your presidency and manage to still get to a last-minute political agreement also on the electricity market design, so we can manage to go through a political agreement by the end of the year. Thanks a lot for your work, and again, best of luck with the last 9 days.
Thank you very much. And it certainly makes me wonder and pose a follow-up question that what can still be achieved in your last days of your mandate. But I'll hand over also to Peter de Boos from E3G, and then Danielle, happy to have any reactions from you, if you have any. Thanks, Peter.
Thank you very much, Ms. Hedberg, and thank you very much, Minister Liljeberg, for the introduction and the invite opportunity to be here. I just made a couple of reflections, I think, from my side on sort of the overall context we are. I think we're way out of sort of normal presidencies or normal ways of doing things at the moment in Europe, gone after, you know, years of pandemics straight into the emergency situation we had last year. And I think, you know, one of the struggles we've really, I think we find ourselves having is to sort of how do we go from a sort of emergency mode of working and thinking as we did when, you know, prices went up and everyone was just occupied with how to manage that situation, to the sort of forward planning kind of discussions that we also had. And I think that was really the sort of the context in which your presidency took place. And I think one key takeaway message is really that Europe really, and particularly the European Green Deal, stepped up and really showed a clear message of, you know, the renewables are the way forward. We're going to accelerate the transition through the, you know, increase of targets you mentioned before. And that's really important because a lot of the rest of the world was really looking at Europe like, well, how is this going to end? And, you know, the news of coal plants going back online in a few places on certain conditions traveled very quickly. The fact we were stepping up on renewables didn't travel that fast. So I think that was really a key development, a key achievement. I think the thing I should maybe just dwell a little bit is the power market reform discussion you already touched upon, where of course I think things did go a bit in the wrong direction last week, to be completely frank about it. I think putting the coal subsidies proposal back on the table made it harder to get an agreement on Monday, and I think also sends the kind of signal to the world we don't really want to be sending now, which is, you know, as E3G, we do a lot of work on international climate energy diplomacy. We're really struggling with the rest of the world, telling Europe, well, you want us to increase our ambition, but you are not walking the talk yourself. So any discussion even on coal subsidies like we're having now is really not helping. Is not really helping there. So I think that is really an important issue to address. But I think that the broader point about the power market reform really is that it's essential to prepare us for the kind of high renewable, low fossil fuel or zero fossil fuel power system that we're going to have to move towards. So I think it's really important to put the focus back on what, you know, heads of governments end of December in the midst of the energy crisis mandated the Commission to do in terms of this power market reform, which was to use it to prepare for a fully decarbonized power system and a high share of renewables. And I think that should really be the core objective there. And that's the one issue we really need to focus on there is the issue of flexibility. So how do we improve how do we grow flexibility markets, flexibility opportunities, empower consumers to benefit from the cheap renewables we're going to be putting onto the agenda. So I think that's really sort of the key thing we would hope you could still focus on the last final days. No idea how you're going to still manage that or not, but I think that in terms of whoever does this is where we need to be all going together now. So thank you again very much for your hard work and then the opportunity to be here.
Thank you, Peter. And maybe just picking up on, because certainly the proposal to prolong capacity mechanisms for coal power plants has raised several concerns. So can you perhaps also give us a bit of the background for that? Why was this done? And how, going forward, how, if, and when and how this will be implemented? So how the negative implications of that will be taken into consideration. And as Peter well put, certainly kind of the message that we want to send out also to outside world is that we are on track with our green transition, and coming COP28 and all the discussion that we're having about actually trying to get the message across that we do want to phase out fossil fuels. And coal certainly is a tricky one for Europe to deal with. So how can we ensure that we can keep this international climate commitment alive if Europe itself is implementing measures that actually counter the message? But yes, please.
Thank you, both Peter and Nicola, for those encouraging comments about the Swedish presidency. Our team has been working hard, and we've reached results, and we're happy to be able to say that today. On the EMD, it's only June 21st, so we do have 9 days, and we will spend them working hard, our team and myself. And we'll see how far that gets us, but I can assure you that we will spend the time wisely, working hard. About the capacity mechanisms for Poland, Poland argues that it's important for security of supply, and well, the presidency has a responsibility to ensure that whatever proposals are put forward have a majority, and I really can't make any more comments on that. Of course, Sweden is completely committed to a fossil-free future for Sweden and all of Europe, but sometimes you have to make considerations. Yeah.
Very good. And as was mentioned by Nicola as well, and have to say that it was great how you picked on the industrial competitiveness and recognized the role that energy plays across different sectors, and how interlinked the decisions that are made on energy will be for industry, but obviously something that is perhaps less discussed in Europe, also for agriculture sector, etc. So having this kind of a comprehensive approach going forward is extremely important. So from that perspective, how hopeful, how optimistic are you that we really are on track? Because we see that obviously there is currently enormous questions around not only the security of supply, which obviously was raised in the discussion, and like you mentioned, the example for Poland, and the questions around the security of supply is a serious one. There are serious questions around the industrial competitiveness. Can we actually compete on the international market? Are we going to be seeing as many of our own industry leaving Europe if we feel that there is not this needed security of supply and affordable energy available for our industry? So kind of just a bit more on that. Can you give your assessment of how good is our progress at the moment, and especially when we're looking at the current security of supply challenges in Europe? Have we done enough to address these? And it also links also to the question around next winter. Are we prepared for what's to come?
Well, thank you, Annika, for those very interesting questions that you raised, and I'm not sure that I have the answers. And before I try to say anything about it, I would like to say that now I probably leave the presidency role and just speak as a policy, energy policy guy, as all of you are. I think we have, as far as the goals that we have set for us, are very good. and they are, I should say, extremely ambitious. And I think the tough part will be to reach those goals. For instance, in Sweden, we have a goal of doubling our production and consumption of electricity by 2045, from 140 terawatt hours to 300 terawatt hours. And that's a nice goal, very ambitious, but you have to deliver. And that is that we have to build a lot more grid and a lot more production. And that's easy to say in 2023, then you have to do it. And that includes having companies invest in probably a lot of nuclear and wind in Sweden, and be able to do so. And in that view, 20 years is a quite short time. It's not that far away. So I think that's a challenge. The challenge is not, we have the goals now, but now we have to deliver, and that's going to be the big challenge. And where everyone is in that journey towards 2050 or 2045, that's I'm not aware of completely the situation in all member states, but everyone's going to have to work hard to deliver on these goals.
Thank you. And just to remind our audience, very happy to take any questions you may have. Just so feel free to raise your hand or pose your questions in the Q&A box in the chats. But coming back to an extremely important area, which is the social dimension and bringing people on board. And obviously with the reform discussion, one of those attempts has been that we need to find a way to help protect consumers against high prices. So how would you see that this discussion has advanced? Again, are we ready for the next winter? Will the consumers be protected next winter? And on another level, which is not just about protection, but actually enabling people to play an active part in Europe's clean energy transition. So are we, and how far have we advanced, for example, in discussions on how we can facilitate, for example, energy sharing among households? How can we really help people play a more active part in this transition that we need?
I guess that question is for me as well.
Yes, it would be.
I think we can do several things, and I think we have to have the eyes on the long-term goals. But in the short term, I think we should all be concerned and worried that the coming winter and the coming winters may be very tough. But there is in the EMD proposal suggestions for price regulation in the event that we have extreme price situations. But I think politicians need to more focus on how do we increase electricity production and energy production. That's the only long-term solution for what we are seeing. So that is our responsibility in the short and the long term. But it's going to be very tough in the short term. And I don't think households, well, they have a responsibility, of course, but I think it falls more on the politicians and the authorities to make these investments happen. And then we can, of course, help households. Like in Sweden, we subsidize energy transitions. If you can, switch from electricity to other ways of heating your house, then we will subsidize that. Those kinds of schemes on a national level are probably a good thing, I think. So we can work in a lot of ways, but I think the responsibility on energy falls on the politicians' shoulders, I think, more than households.
Very good. And about, for example, this facilitating energy sharing among households, has this been discussed? To what extent, kind of finding a way to ensure that the citizens can really, and be it when we're talking about prosumers or when we're talking about people producing their own electricity, sharing it, it's really trying to find these ways to activate people, mobilize them. So how far have these kind of discussions advanced?
That aspect has not been that evident in these files. So I think future presidents will see this, and the Commission will have to come back to these things, but they are very important, as you mentioned. And in Sweden, a lot of house owners, they are installing solar on. But maybe have they not been so prominent in the files that we have been working on this spring.
Thank you. And while posing questions to you, obviously, I'll be happy to turn to Nicola and Peter at some point as well to provide their reflections. But one question we have from the audience, and this is from Simone de Querel from EPC, how will the revision of the REMIT regulation, on which the Council reached a general approach on Monday, help to increase transparency and integrity of the internal energy market and increase consumer protection? So if you want to say something more on that still.
Well, I'll have to give a short answer, but and that is that Acer will get a much stronger authority to look for things that are not working out for the consumers. So that is the basic idea, but I will have to come back to you on the specifics on that.
Very good. And Nicola and Peter, I'll be happy to give you a chance because we certainly have been covering a lot of field here. So please feel free to jump in as well. Peter.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think since the sort of discussion went a bit into the direction also of the social aspects of all of this, I think maybe one reflection to share is that I think there's been also a real shift in the way we've talked and think about these things, in the sense that until quite recently, I think the whole social dimension was really focused about what about the just transition for fossil fuel industry workers, and how do we ensure quality employment going forward. And I think we're now in a situation where we have a discussion that's dominated by skill shortages in a lot of key sectors. So instead of what do we do with the fossil fuel workers, is how do we get the clean tech, clean industry workers to come in, which I think is a completely different discussion. And secondly, energy prices, and how do we bring energy prices again down to I think that is a real shift that's really positive. But I think that the key challenge there in the end is, apart from the question of how do we address skill shortages and sort of and also maintain the sort of the social contract we've had and strengthen it in fossil industries and transpose that into these new industries, is how do we make consumers benefit, or how do we help them benefit from cheap renewables coming online? And I think that is really the core question we need to concentrate on. And it's not going to necessarily immediately get better, because of the fact that we still have a number of years we're going to have fossil generation capacity on the system. It's going to take us time to get rid of that. So I think we're going to need some clever solutions that allow consumers to be taking advantage of a grid that's more digital, that in an ideal world maybe even have locational pricing. Those are the kind of things I think we need to be thinking about, and how we move forward on that. So the conversation really becomes like, how do you use your power so that you keep your prices down, or even earn money for using your appliances at a certain points, etc. So I think that's really the sort of direction we like to see going here. So but of course that's not going to happen during your presidency, so this is more of a general point about where this discussion goes next. But yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Peter. We have also a few hands up. I'll hand over first to Gelin Karina Christensen. You can unmute yourself.
I'm sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you. My name is Karina Christensen. I represent the northern regions of Sweden from North Sweden European office. And I'd like to highlight, first of all, I'd like to say that it's great that you have lots of, well, EU now is open up for lots of different energy solutions. Still though, bioenergy is the largest renewable energy. And so I just want to ask a question here. Like, if a lot of people now invest in pellets burners, they're afraid of electricity cost, and they invest in pellets burners. And we, after the war, we cannot import any more pellets or bioenergy from Russia and Belarus, and I guess not very much from Ukraine. And through the deforestation legislation, I believe we also cut off Canada as now actually buy pellet. Several countries in Union buy from Canada. And so I wonder, the pellets prices increased by 3 times in Germany last year. And so I wonder if I could get some comments on that, how the deforestation legislation affects energy prices, and because more people want to buy bioenergy, and the deforestation legislation and many other legislation, LULUCF, and many of the suggestions may reduce the amount of bioenergy on the market, including deforestation legislation, which will probably be cut off all of Canada, as they almost only harvest primary forest, which is forbidden according to that legislation, and how this will affect common people in the Union. I represent the Arctic region, which is very cold, but it's also cold in Germany, cold in France, and the winters are harsh for everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Karina. And I think that's when we're talking about bioenergy, obviously it's very close to the heart of the Nordics as an example. But certainly it's a great example of also the trade-offs that we need to make in the clean energy transition, and when we are trying to take a comprehensive approach to becoming a climate neutral. And so perhaps it would be interesting, Daniel, if you're able to reflect also a bit more on these developments on bioenergy at the moment, if you wish to say something.
I don't have lots to say, but I think it's very encouraging that things are developing, and I think how RED turned out ensures that bioenergy and biofuels will be important in the future. But of course, this is globally traded good, so prices are being set on a global market, and so production will probably be a very how should I say, profitable business in the future, and good for the environment.
We also have a question in the Q&A box about the investments needs. So ambitious goals require huge investments, and the Recovery and Resilience Facility has been chosen as the main funding tool of the REPowerEU plan, mainly through loans. Do you deem the current level of EU funding as sufficient?
I should probably refrain from talking too much about that, but I think we need a lot of private investments in new electricity production, and therefore I think the EMD is very important, how CFDs will work in the future, and how investors how they will be brave to make the steps and invest in electricity production, and I think we need a lot of private capital, and that can come from pension funds and all kinds of places, but the market needs to deliver on this, and therefore we need the mechanisms in place, and therefore the EMD is crucial.
Great. John Balmer, you have your hand up, so feel free to unmute yourself.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Very interesting. I've had long experience of successive Swedish presidencies during my years at the European Policy Centre, and I've always been impressed with their performance. We hear from time to time rather contradictory estimates of the likelihood of a breakthrough on nuclear fusion. I can remember visiting the EU research centres 30 years ago and being told that it was a matter of a year or two. I wonder, have you formed any view in your period in the presidency as to what contribution it's realistic to expect from fusion?
Yes, please, Daniel.
Yes, no, sorry, the presidency has not looked at that issue. It's very interesting, and for Sweden as well, since we plan to invest in a lot of new nuclear. But no, this has not been an issue for the Swedish presidency to work with. Unfortunately, I might add, but it hasn't been in the files, so to speak.
If I may, I would like to take the discussion to the global level. So we saw that one of the agenda points at the council meeting was the external energy relations. So can you reflect a bit more on that? And also, where are we and how are we ensuring that the EU's clean energy transition will not replace the old dependencies with new ones? That's certainly one of the great risks and great debates we hear being discussed at the moment.
That's a very interesting question, and I'm not sure that I have all the answers here today. Maybe several of you do, but it's a very important thing. And the awful invasion of Ukraine highlights this. But I am very happy to say that, as you all know, we have decreased the dependency on Russian gas in the last year and a half since the invasion. And so I think the EU has responded very well. But you're onto something very, very crucial in energy policy. Unfortunately, the previous government in Sweden oversaw the closure of several nuclear reactors in Sweden. And in the short term, this has led to more CO2 emissions from Sweden. We're still at a very extremely low level, but still, if you have bad energy policy, you take the risk of moving backwards as far as emissions go, and that should be avoided at all costs almost.
Thank you. I'm checking, Karina Christensen, you still have your hand up. Did you still want to come in? Okay, no. And Nicola and Peter, again, I do want to give you a chance if you do wish to.
I'm sorry, I tried to lower it. I'm sorry.
No worries, no worries. Nicola and Peter, would either of you, should you wish to react, I'll be happy to handle. Yes, Peter, please.
Well, no, sure. I mean, I think, you know, global aspects is something we're covering a lot. I think in terms of the dependencies points, I think one of the things we're always very keen to emphasize is that we should be really completely, well, China is completely relaxed about Europe de-risking and not wanting to be completely dependent on China's supply chains for its solar, for the amount of solar capacity is going to have to build in the next decade. Because they do it themselves and they completely understand that we're going to have to do it as well. So I think maybe one message or one point is that we should be, you know, feeling comfortable and relaxed about de-risking and just building up relationship with countries that are, of course, you know, fully more diversified than it was with fossil energy. But I think the opportunities there are just by the very nature, you know, renewables will be cheap in places that are, you know, there's a lot of places where renewables will be very cheap to produce around the world. So I think that is not the biggest risk we see. I think that the big risk, and maybe that's also just sort of bearing in mind here with being with the Swedish presidency and the views you take on often, you know, the questions of solidarity within the EU. But I think a lot of these global discussions around how fast do we move and how many countries do we bring along are very similar to the discussions we have in Europe around this, you know, and it's going to be incredibly hard to become and remain a leader on climate and clean energy transition and trying to do it on a budget, on a shoestring. And that applies, I think, both within the EU, but also internationally. So we're going to have to come up with some very good ideas on how we're going to show the solidarity both within the EU, so we close the low carbon gaps we have within the EU, but then also with the rest of the world that, you know, I mean, we've been having some very interesting new discussions about new mechanisms like just energy transition partnerships, but really struggling because of the financing aspects, among other things. So I think that is really the sort of my second point is, you know, if we want to move fast there and ambitiously, we really need to overcome the sort of in Germany would say the eine schwäbische Hausfrau, but that wouldn't be, I'm not sure that works here in this context. But basically, one needs to sort of abandon some of the sort of more orthodox views on finance here. Thanks.
Thanks, Peter. And Nicola, please come in.
Yes, thank you, Annika. And I'd like to take the occasion to maybe make two comments. One is on strategic dependencies. I think it's very important what you've been mentioning so far. I'd just like to expand also the concept to the industrial dimension. Because we might end up by only focusing on energy that we don't, we might start creating even more dependencies if we don't take care of our industrial production in Europe. We've seen it during COVID time. What does it mean? Not having a sufficient capacity to produce vaccines in Europe, and depending on other external factors, we need to look also at that dimension, because of course, if we start, let's say, delocating industrial production outside Europe, we might also be striking very well in terms of local energy and CO2 emissions, but then we are not really credible internationally on climate change, and we are increasing our dependencies on other strategic materials that are equally important together with energy. That was one point. Secondly, if I can come back on the discussion on electricity markets, because that is, as Daniel was mentioning, we still have 9 days to go. So I'm happy that there is still a momentum to not to give up, but still working. We heard about the needs to secure there will be sufficient investments to move our power sector to decarbonization, which I think is important. At the same time, we also need to make sure that there is the political will to get these electricity prices down, because otherwise it becomes also from industrial perspective where electrification is one of the options to decarbonize. Well, of course, if that for energy intensive industries, if this is this means increasing the OPEX, then of course it becomes a non-option. And we are living in this tension because, of course, from an electricity producer, the higher the prices, the higher is the return, the highest the investment signal to invest. But of course, from a consumer point of view, it's the flip side. So we need to find the right balance, as everything is in life. I just wish that whatever political discussion are taking place now in the council, and we are reading it, but of course, I guess be in the room, it's even more complex. Just to make sure that this willingness to get to whatever we are discussing, the goals to get to lower electricity prices needs to be there, because that would also help us in discussing with our members in terms of ability now to start investing and to get some support mechanism that will only be a bridge towards a next future, when then those support mechanisms will no longer be needed, because we have reached the breaking point whereby electricity prices are cost competitive, and they allow us to go on a commercial basis without the need for further support. If that endpoint is not politically visible, at least, then it seems like an unlimited call for subsidies, which is unfeasible from economic, social, any sort of parameter you want to put in your KPIs. So thank you.
Thanks, Nicola. Daniel, happy to turn to you and give you a chance to respond, but picking up, for example, on what Peter says about what I would say is the race to the top. It's really what we see at the moment is that the clean energy transition, the green transition, we're seeing the US taking efforts, we're seeing China progressing on its own speed. So in many ways, there is this race to the top. It's not going to be easy for Europe, the EU, to maintain its leadership. It will require investments. We could say that there's also a subsidy race that is on at the moment. So the question is, how do we as a Europe, as the EU, battle in this new environment, while at the same time, obviously, stay committed to the goals that we've set for ourselves, but then ensure that we actually become the leaders. We will become the standard setters for the needed solutions. And at the same time, we'll be ensuring our clean energy transition, affordable energy for decades to come.
That's some of those questions are probably above my pay grade, but of course we can talk about these things that are very important, and we have very ambitious goals, and maybe the competitors globally don't have those same goals, which may attract investments in a different way. So these are how should you say, conflicts of interest that we need to address in Europe. And we just need to work hard and attract the investments. I think one area to work on is the permitting process to ensure that investors that make a big decision to make an investment in a European country will not be met by red tape everywhere and have to spend years battling to make these investments, while in maybe America and China, these things go much faster and are much easier. So that investor risk, I think, needs to come down quite a lot. And then if we achieve that, I think we can do great things. And we can be the trendsetter globally, but it's not going to be easy in any way.
Thank you very much. As I do not see more questions, I would like to pose the last question. Oh, Peter, please do come in.
Well, I think maybe just one reflection, I think, on that last point about global competitiveness is that I think we're really getting into a different world where it's all about the low carbon competitiveness. I think, you know, we for years in Europe have been getting used to sort of, we lead, the rest needs to follow. But I think we're in a situation where some have started acting in ways that, you know, they've really stepped up. And I think particularly the US, we've always said US needs to do more. Well, they've done more in the way they could do it according to their own domestic political circumstances, and that was the IRA. So I think we need to get used to a world where other major economies are taking climate action, but not necessarily in the way we would do it, not necessarily copying our approach. The US is taking sort of a subsidies approach. China has already been stepping up massively. They're already the biggest renewables leader in the world. India, I think, has ambitions as well there. So I think that's just, you know, in terms of the global competition we should be worrying about, I would say that's the one we need to start getting used to now and thinking about and be creative in how we respond to those. So that was just one quick sort of reflection there.
Thank you, Peter. Extremely important point there, as this is going to be a major challenge for the EU in trying to navigate in this environment, which is quickly evolving. And as the competition is just getting tougher, the question is, how do we compete? And as I said, is that we certainly should have the interest to be leaders in this transition, in a global transition. And the market is growing for solutions, products, services, breakthrough technologies. And it's in our interest to try to ensure that in Europe, we're creating this kind of an enabling environment for our industry to become the leaders of these kind of solutions, so that they will be able to share our solutions also to outside the EU, and will be able to compete on that global market. But then at the same time, as we've discussed a lot today as well, is that we need to ensure our own industrial competitiveness within our borders. And I think, Peter, when you're talking about the low carbon competitiveness, and certainly we see that the current attention on the clean energy transition, especially on renewables, electricity, the infrastructure, improving the electricity infrastructure, investment and deployment of all these solutions will be central to that, to enhance our competitiveness and industrial competitiveness. So it's a huge challenge, and obviously not everything will be solved in the last days of the Swedish presidency. There's certainly a lot more to be tackled in the upcoming presidencies. But I actually wanted to ask I'm checking, is there one more question that came in? Yes, sorry, I see that there's a question about the recording of the event. So yes, there will be a recording of the event, which will be published on our website after the event. But for the final question I would have for you, Danielle, is that now obviously you still have a few days to go. Good luck, all the best with these days. But then afterwards, what are your kind of main hopes for the next 6 months, for the next 12 months. What do you think are the files, the issues that we desperately need to solve and that may not be able to get an agreement in the last remaining days of your presidency? But what do you hold as the big priorities for the EU if we want to be prepared for the winter and if we want to be on a solid track to the clean energy transition in the future? Thank you.
Well, thank you, Annika. Maybe this is the last time I talk, so let me say thank you for leading this event so nicely. I think it's been a good discussion, and I've learned some things from the other speakers and from you. To address your last question, we'll see what happens to the EMD in these last 9 days. If we reach finalization for the council, we'll see. But in any event, this is going to have to be taken forward with the parliament and so forth and commission. So the EMD, I think I've expressed that in previous things that I've said, that in order to have investment, the EMD needs to be in place. So that's an important point. Another one is probably EPBD. I think that's an important one to bring to a close after the Swedish presidency as soon as possible. So there are probably more I should mention, but those two are important. Thank you so much for having me today.
Thank you, Daniel. Thank you, Nicola, Peter. Thank you for our audience for participating. I think the discussion has certainly demonstrated that the work continues. And what we desperately need to do is that we need to shift from declarations to implementation, have those files concluded so that we can start the work and take the concrete measures to really speed up the energy transition. And I think there's certainly the challenges that we see in this discussion, for example, when it comes to subsidies for fossil fuels, is that at the moment, still we are in this period where the transition is taking place. A lot of short-term measures, also emergency measures have been taken that may not always get us on the right track the fastest. They also may be sending out a signal to global partners that may be contradictory with the direction where we want to go. So we need to find a way. How do we ensure that any questions, concerns that these kind of short-term emergency measures may create, that they will be addressed, and that ultimately the message is clear to everyone in Europe as well as outside, is that our policies, our investments are there to create an enabling environment to get us to the future we want. And it is extremely important, obviously, that this is also signaled to the world outside the EU, as ultimately we do want this global transition to happen. But Daniel, thank you again so much. Good luck with the last days and wrapping up. And I should also say and tell our audience here today that today's event is actually the last event I'll moderate as the head of program for Sustainable Prosperity for Europe program. I've been at EPC now for 13.5 years and will be off to new adventures. But as I know that in the audience, there are many people who I got to know over the years, I just wanted to bid farewell and thank also you for your interest and loyalty for our discussions over the years. And of course, everyone, please do stay tuned for all the discussions we have in store for you. Also, after the summer, we will continue to follow very closely what's happening with the clean energy transition and obviously trying to keep up the Green Deal alive. But thank you, everyone, for participating and wishing you a good day.